All right, I just sent him a text.
So if there's only going to be 2 of us, do we want to keep the kind of like round robin Q&A format still?
What do you think, Courtney?
I mean, I think there's probably less of a need for that. I still think maybe, if there are questions that you feel more comfortable with than others, I would say, hey, maybe make me the primary on this one. But I don't know that there's a real need to do a round robin.
I could also probably find somebody.
Just send Diana after him.
There's enough MVPs around. I can find somebody. Let me put a couple feelers out.
All right. And then on the second topic, I think the conversation, like the way that I like to take this conversation typically is, I think it's more breaking out, because a lot of people think test-driven development and they think, unit testing and everything. But I think what's more important is like the UAT stuff that the business is actually going to be providing. So if you're going to go with a test-driven development paradigm, which I think works pretty well for automation, then you have to be really strong on your intake side to get the data in the first place that you're going to be testing against. So you need to have a really strong definition of your process through a business analyst or whoever's doing the intake, so that can flow through to the developers and streamline their process. Right. So I think a lot of that is like cross-team functionality type things, and how do you communicate between 2 different worlds? And that's where like an agile tool chain that integrates those kinds of things together, CI/CD testing, workflow, and documentation, all of those things are being touched by multiple teams. So you need to have some kind of tool chain and standard procedures in place so that those people are in sync. So that's how I would focus that conversation, and that's these bullet points all kind of touch to that.
Okay.
And then the last one, I actually had fewer bullet points on this one. I think it's a little higher level, right? But I think a lot of the questions that I hear are even like the pushback against like going with some kind of a higher level architecture phase in your SDLC is like, how do you even know when to make something into a reusable component that you're actually going to get the value out of, right? And I don't think about it that way typically, because the way that I think about it is, if you have a really solid tool chain for building a reusable component, everything can be built as a reusable component. And so if you're really good at building those fast, why not build everything the same way? So that's all implemented the same way and developers can pick it up and understand it faster. Is typically how I think about it. But there is some validity to the argument that, like, some things that just aren't worth making reusable from the start. And I think that an earlier program doesn't necessarily know how to design reusable components all that well. So there's a little bit of a give and take there. But that's kind of what I think of how process architecture and reusability like tie together. And then I think the important thing is like how, like, there's time invested in architecture, but then on the other side, what is the return of that? How does that save the development team time, right? And what specifically how does it impact the development cycle, right? And And then what can you accomplish without that? And then what can you only accomplish with that, right? Like there are certain things that you're kind of locked away from if you don't have a good architecture step, but you can do a lot of other things without it entirely, right? And so I think a lot of people are in kind of a gray area of they want to do these crazy projects but don't know how because they don't have the specific key step that they need to go through to take on the bigger ideas.
So do you have any discussion of framework in here or choice of that type of thing?
When you say like choice of framework
Well,
or
so do you consider like do you use the standard RE framework? Do you use other stuff? How do you make that choice? Is
yeah,
it
I
required?
think that's for me, it's I think about processes kind of logically before I attach the implementation to them,
Mhm.
right? I'm like, how does this process work? And does it fit into this kind of framework? And a lot of times, depending on, you know, how the business does things, it's worthwhile to make the process fit into those frameworks. So if you're using REFs, dispatchers, performers for everything, and that's your developers have a good understanding of how that works, maybe a process that isn't specifically fit in that paradigm can be made to fit in that paradigm.
Mhm.
So you can tackle it that way. But I don't have any content in here that specifically talks about those frameworks and templates now.
Do you guys have a variety to choose from, or is there a standard where, like, you know, if you're doing transactions, it has to be RE framework, or like, do you have any general principle that you abide by?
I typically go for the REF first.
Mhm.
I try to get everything into queues. There's two main architectures that I see, and I think one's going to win out longer term, but that's not the one that the REF is in. I think there's kind of the queue-based batch dispatcher, batch performer, right?
Mhm.
And that's where the dispatcher uploads in batch in bulk, and then the performer performs transactions relatively fast, right? And that's pretty common. It's pretty easy to understand, and that's what the REF is built for. But I think that there's a newer architecture that's kind of working its way through the chain and is going to get some standards put around it, and that's the single job per queue item, right? Kind of this transient association between those two. And I think that what's driving that is kind of like the integration service mentality of, you know, different API calls are able to call through different channels. So scaling up is almost easier to handle in one job than it is to handle a loop internally. And I think it depends on where you are infrastructurally, whether you can achieve that. I think document understanding is a really good use case where that single job per queue item kind of transient assignment there works. But there aren't a whole lot of like standards and tool sets built out for it. Now I built those out myself, like for my teams, those kinds of templates. But it's typically for like it's only really internal, right? It's
Mhm.
not something that's supported by UiPath. So it depends on where your development team is at, right?
Right. Do you use the enhanced RE framework?
The enhanced RE framework.
Mhm. It's
I
out
haven't seen
in
that one.
yeah, the UiPath built it a couple of years ago. I was about we're actually gonna implement it for a little side project just to see what it's about, but it's out um on Marketplace where you can download it. And there's
That's
a, you know,
interesting.
like 40 others too, for that matter. So I was curious about that. If I mean, it's got stuff that it's supposed to be better error handling and better able to be modified for different types of transaction um, objects, but it morphs easier. I was gonna give it a whirl just to try it out, but it's been out there a little while.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the flowchart or the state machine for it now. That's
Mhm.
interesting. So it bounces between two and then goes to end process.
So do you believe that, like, the dispatcher performer model requires the creation of two separate automations entirely, or that you can create the single automation that performs both or either task?
So I've done it both ways. And a lot of times it comes down to whether the dispatcher needs UI automation or not, right? If the dispatcher needs UI automation, I typically do everything in the performer, right? So I pull down one REF, I have a step that gets the data. If it can be got in batch, then I do that right there at the start of the performer, load my queue items, and
Mhm.
then perform my queue items from that. It also depends on, like, if you want to parallelize, right? If you want to have multiple performers running, you can't use that type of architecture because they'll all upload replicas of the same thing. So, I mean, if you're trying to parallelize, you have to break them into two separate or have some kind of complex flagging going between them, and I don't think that's efficient.
Mhm.
I think that the individual jobs is better, but typically most dispatchers fit inside of the, like, breaking them into two separate processes, right?
Mhm.
But I don't use an REF for my dispatcher ever. Like, I really don't find a whole lot of transactional dispatcher adding when I automate things. It's all bulk. It's like an SQL query, or you're scraping an
Right,
entire table from the UI. So it's like, that's not it's not really transactional in any way. So it doesn't
right.
make sense to put it inside of an REF.
Yeah,
So
that's
that's like the
true.
first template that I always build out, is a dispatcher template.
Interesting. Yeah, I feel like the UiPath doesn't really talk about that topic in general, but people assume that you have to make them separate always, and I don't really know that that makes sense every time.
Yeah, I think in a lot of cases, and where things are going now, the dispatcher is getting lighter and lighter weight. And in some cases, it doesn't even exist entirely, right? Like integration service type stuff, if there's, or just API endpoints, if there's a service calling into UiPath and adding queue items, it's pretty common now. Like, you can hook in ServiceNow or something, and it adds a queue item. And in those cases, like, your dispatcher is this process that fires off during an event. So it's an event-based thing. And if it's event-based, you're not getting your items in bulk, right? So what's the advantage of having this performer that performs things on a loop, right?
Mhm.
And like, the performer still works for that. It's just going to do one thing at a time, and it's going to spin up and spin down constantly. And so in those cases, it's like you don't even have a dispatcher. So the performer is really all you're building as a component. And I like to make them two different code pieces, because if you do that, then making the dispatcher follows the same kind of workflow every time, right? You pull down your dispatcher template, you get your items, you load them into the queue. A lot of that can be, like, boilerplated away for you. The performer pretty much stays the same over any process. So baking the dispatcher into the performer means that my performer is going to be, like, somewhat customized for that process, or there's going to be like a dispatcher piece of it enabled. And I just I like having multiple jobs handle things. I like being able to put jobs anywhere and using the job priority as kind of a scheduling
Mhm.
thing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, it does.
Yeah.
I was curious about what you thought about it. Um, because that, UiPath is infamous for a lack of documentation and everything.
Oh yeah.
Just enough to, like, make you have a bunch of questions. So it looks like Dan can probably join you guys to talk on Tuesday.
What's Dan's last name?
Fishkin.
Bishkin?
Fishkin, Daniel Fishkin. I think he's 3 years, 2, 3 years MVP.
I don't know if I
He's
know him.
quiet. Yeah, he doesn't talk in group calls. He's the quiet guy. He's the one that did PlantBot last year in December, if you saw that.
I did see that, yeah.
That's Dan. He put, "I got you, girl." I think that's means he'll join us, but I'm waiting to confirm. But that's Dan. So I'll give him a little bit more detail and make sure. So we were just talking through Nico, the topics we were I can put it on screen. Well, I've got 6 minutes and then I'll have to jump for another call, but talking through topics. Mason pasted some questions already in here, so wanted to run through these. Make sure you were good with them. If you want to look through them quick, let me paste this in the chat. Actually, I think the link's still there. Yeah, the link to this doc is in this chat.
Can you paste it again? Because I don't have
Yep.
the history of the chat.
Sure. I will. Here you
I
go.
think I have it at some email or something,
Yeah,
but
there you go. It's there now.
thanks. I had like just 5 to 10 unread emails, and today I have like 57. So kind of
Yeah, no
got
worries.
all mixed up.
This is all in addition to the actual job you have. This is just total side gig. So
I
you want
just try to do the like enter and says send verification code to mst@solvering.org.
oh, did it just thought this was the group joint copy link. Maybe that was just Mason's link. Here's a everybody link,
Cool.
but it's the same thing I have on screen. You want to look through these few questions and make sure you're clear on, and I recorded this also in case you want to go back and look.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I'll check the recording, but standardized things like my convention has standard constraint to big picture, hangar artifact stewardship, keeping.
And I'll clean these up a little bit to make it super clear what we're talking about at all times, but wanted to make sure you were directionally okay with these.
Yeah, those seem good.
And if you do have a specific question, since these were Mason's, I think you can add and comment him since he's got access to it, but or email if not.
Yeah, please add to it. I don't want it all to be questions that I put in there.
No, I like fully trusting you. But to testings, Agile approach. Yeah, I think for this one, TD is the one that I have like less knowledge probably, but I think looks great.
All right.
Tool chain integrates. Cool. Cool. Yeah, sounds great. Probably also since we're talking about all of that. Well, maybe on process architecture and reusability, maybe on some of this, or in the first one, just using like GitHub or something to like store your code. Maybe in the first one, like on best practices for development.
Oh yeah, the first.
Yeah,
slide
like version
there.
control. I think it's super important here. At least mentioning a little bit of the importance of version control on a more like
That equivalent
theoretical.
to the artifact a place.
Yeah, what do you think? Version control and
artifact
change
stewardship?
management kind of stuff.
Yeah, even though we don't mention much on UiPath itself, like we can mention that it has integrations with GitHub and stuff, and people can then decide what's best. But at least just mention the importance on a project, like on development. But yeah, other than that, what was the last one? Like the process architecture, right?
Yeah, that's the one where I had a little bit less, but I could talk forever on it, on the things that I did put
Definitely. Thinking about.
We are so nerdy. I just have to say that.
there.
We're all excited and giddy, like, oh yes, tool chain.
Oh, that's like a nice, I'd say, phrase to markup.
Which one?
The one that thinking about every component on the toolchain as a reusable component. It's like
Yeah.
a slogan for
I see a
reusable.
white paper in your
reusability.
futures.
Yeah. Team time. Yeah, I think the only thing that I would add for the development teams
Oops,
time
sorry, I
on
pressed
that
the
last
wrong
one,
button.
it's adding on the importance of process architecture in regards to support and maintainability.
Oh yeah.
So
Like you're gonna be seeing your code 6 months after, and if you did spaghetti code, like you'll have a hard time finding stuff. Like just think about like it's going to be hard to maintain even when you know what you wrote, but you won't remember in 6 months. Now think about it if someone else wrote it. Yeah, I think something like that. Again, it's part of like a whole conversation, probably not just mentioning each of the bullets, right?
right.
Cool. Yeah, I think they.
So
all
I
make sense.
gotta go ahead and run to another meeting. But if you guys wanna like rank questions, maybe we reorder them because I don't know if we'll get to everything here. We'll kind of have to play it by ear, and when we get to the end, that'll be it, or skip some or whatever. So if you guys want to run through and pick your few favorites on each page, that would be helpful for that.
Cool.
Alrighty. We're good. All right. Cool. We'll talk soon. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Have a great weekend.
See you soon.
Bye-bye.